What's up? What's going on? What's good? This is Boxing Source here, and I wanted to put up this video that won't necessarily be available for the public immediately. Might be later on down the line. But for those that did get this link and receive this video, this is for something that I have seen recently on a YouTube channel through Counterpunch Boxing News, the alternate site that Kurt DeVille had, and he had posted almost a week ago. So I wish I had seen it pretty much a day or two after he released it. But he kind of brought up an interesting topic, and in that particular video, he kind of brought up a question as to what was happening with Deontay Wilder. And the question was, is PBC the real snakes in the camp? And he posted that video because he watched something from Fanon, right? And Fanon had talked about how there was like some instance where Deontay Wilder could have fought Charles Martin, and they didn't make that happen, and they had Charles Martin go, fight Anthony Joshua and other things like that. And that is, I guess, part of the reason why, was it that Fanon may feel that PBC hadn't really done Wilder well. But Kurt kind of like counterpunched that to a certain extent. But I wanted to go even further with that. I kind of go through things from a historical perspective when it comes to events that happen within the sport. And here in the heavyweight division, you gotta, go back to that particular time period, right? So he's talking about the whole thing. Well, Fanon was talking about this thing with Charles Martin and Deontay Wilder, and that they could have fought each other for the unified titles at the time. I kind of, at one point, I felt the same way, right? But they didn't want to make that happen, and for financial reasons. And I kind of seen it, and I see it even more now. But like I said, from a historical perspective, I'm going to break it down to you, and I'm going to add in a couple more elements, right? So we're going to actually go back to the second half of 2015, right? Deontay Wilder was a WBC champion. He had already made his first defense against Eric Molina. He was setting to fight Johann Duhaupas for his second defense. So he has that. That's around like September or so. Now, you had, at the time, the unified champion was Vladimir Klitschko. And he had a choice to fight the IBF mandatory or the WBO mandatory. IBF mandatory was Vladislav Glazkov. WBO mandatory was Tyson Fury. He goes and he faces Tyson Fury. That's set for November of 2015. Okay. Wilder defeats Duhaupas, stops Duhaupas, and then you go into November, and Tyson Fury defeats Vladimir Klitschko for the unified heavyweight championships, WBO, WBA, IBF, IBO. Okay. 9 days after that fight took place, the IBF calls the mandatory and says that Tyson Fury has to fight Vladislav Glazkov. But with Fury defeating Vladimir Klitschko, Klitschko activated this rematch clause, so Tyson Fury was locked in a contract to fight Vladimir Klitschko at that particular time. So what does the IBF do? They strip Tyson Fury of the IBF title, and then they make a fight, or order a fight, between the top contenders that they had at the time, which is Vladislav Glazkov and Charles Martin. So that fight is pretty much made. Now, with Deontay Wilder, he has this time where he kind of like sees who he's going to be fighting next for his next defense. Okay? There was something about maybe him fighting Brian Jennings. That wasn't going to happen. There may be something about him that where he could have fought Vladislav Glazkov, but with Glazkov being the IBF mandatory, Glazkov wanted that opportunity to fight for a world title, so that's what he went for. So Wilder goes ahead and he faces Artur Szpilka, and that is the main event that happens in January 2016 at the Barclays Center. The co-feature bout was for the IBF title. And that's where Vyacheslav Glasgow has his leg injury that, pretty much takes him out of the bout, and Charles Martin becomes IBF champion. Okay, the main event, you have Deontay Wilder against Artur Szpilka. Deontay Wilder knocks out Artur Szpilka to retain the WBC title, right? Okay, now, right after that particular fight, you saw that Tyson Fury stepped in the ring and said, "There's only one Tyson Fury," and all of that stuff. So, Fury and Wilder had gone back and forth, right? But this is with Fury already locked in a rematch with Vladimir Klitschko, but Deontay Wilder specifically said that he had obligations to fight his WBC mandatory at the time, which was Alexander Povetkin, right? So, you have Wilder set to fight Alexander Povetkin, the WBC mandatory. Charles Martin is the IBF champion. Charles Martin had a few opponents that were considered to be his first offense, including Artur Szpilka and Dominic Breazeale and one other fighter that I can't really recall at this particular time, but there is an article that does show those particular opponents. Then, pretty much about a week to 8 days later, in comes Anthony Joshua and Matchroom Boxing with the offer to fight for pretty much up to $8 million for that IBF title. So, Martin is advised to take that fight. Deontay Wilder, as a WBC champion, still was under obligation to fight in the mandatory defense. And that mandatory defense was in a purse bid. Why? Because Wilder at the time did not make that much money to pretty much have a unification fight between him and Martin. And who ended up winning the bid? Povetkin's team for $7 million. So Wilder was due $4 million for that particular fight against Alexander Povetkin. That would have happened. Then you had Martin versus Joshua. So from an advisor standpoint, Heyman and PBC were doing the right thing at that particular time, because, listen, Wilder would have got over $4 million for his fight against Alexander Povetkin, and Charles Martin would have got $6 to $8 million for fighting Anthony Joshua at that particular time. As an advisor, you would rather have that than have Wilder versus Martin in a unification bout that wouldn't garner not even that much money. It might not even get $4 million total. So, in that instance, they did the right thing. It was just that you had the whole little fiasco with Povetkin. I'm not going to go into that. So Wilder loses out on that particular instance to get that $4.5 or $4.7 million or whatever it was. Charles Martin fights Anthony Joshua, gets knocked out in the second round, and it is what it is. Okay? So you had that particular instance, right? But because of that, I don't see that PBC is the real snakes in the camp. Me personally, I always feel like it's JD's and Shelly Finkel. Okay? The reason why I say that is because they have basically directed Deontay Wilder to have fights that he really shouldn't have, and it really doesn't develop him as a fighter. And then you also have the other instance with Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko, where Vladimir Klitschko was in position to be fighting for the vacant WBA heavyweight title after Tyson Fury ended up vacating all the belts, right? So, what happens in this instance? Shelly Finkel has Vladimir Klitschko fight Anthony Joshua instead of Deontay Wilder. Why? M-O-N-E-Y. You see how much money that was. $15 million pretty much for each fighter, for Joshua and Klitschko. Would Klitschko get that much money fighting Deontay Wilder? No. So, for me, I just don't feel like PBC is the one to blame about Wilder not getting his, I guess, shine or whatever it is that he's had over the course of his professional career while he was a WBC champion, and not being put in position to have the big fights that I guess he was asking for and his fans were looking for. So for me, I don't see PBC being the snakes in the camp. They, along with Heyman, advise their fighters to do what's best for them from a business standpoint all across the board. Not just for Wilder, but for the likes of Errol Spence, Danny Garcia, Danny Jacobs. You could go on down the line. But I had to break that down because I just don't feel like, you know, there's a correct way to place blame on people for being quote-unquote snakes in the camp, like Deontay Wilder said, especially when you have, you know, Mark Breland being fired. Nah, that ain't the deal. But that's my take on it. You could give your thoughts about it here on this particular video, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.